Marcus Johnson had never thought of himself as special. He was just a man who worked long hours at a warehouse in Chicago, lifting boxes and loading trucks from morning until night. His hands were rough from hard labor, his back often ached, and his dreams felt like distant memories that belonged to someone else. At 32 years old, he had accepted that life was simply about survival. Pay the bills, keep the apartment, put food on the table. That was enough. But there was one thing that Marcus never told anyone about, something he kept hidden like a secret treasure buried deep in his heart. He could play the piano. Not just play it, but truly make it sing. The problem was that nobody knew this about him. Nobody at all. Growing up in the rough streets of the South Side, Marcus had discovered an old piano in a church basement when he was just 8 years old. The instrument was dusty and forgotten, with several keys that stuck and a few that made no sound at all. But to young Marcus, it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. While other kids played basketball in the streets, Marcus would sneak into that church basement and teach himself to play. He had no teacher. He had no books. He simply listened to music on an old radio and tried to copy what he heard. His fingers would stumble at first, hitting wrong notes that echoed in the empty basement. But slowly, over months and years, something magical began to happen. The music started flowing through him like water through a river. By the time he was 14, Marcus could play almost anything by ear. Classical pieces, jazz standards, gospel hymns, and popular songs all came alive under his fingers. His mother had known about his gift. She was the only one. Late at night, when she came home exhausted from her 2 jobs, Marcus would sometimes play softly for her on the old keyboard she had bought him from a garage sale. Tears would roll down her face as she listened. She always told him he was meant for something greater than their small apartment. She believed in him with all her heart. But when Marcus was 17, his mother passed away suddenly from a heart attack. The grief hit him like a hurricane. He stopped playing completely. He sold the keyboard to help pay for her funeral. Music became too painful because every note reminded him of her smile, her tears of joy, her belief in him. So he buried that part of himself and never looked back. For 15 years, Marcus lived without music. He got a job at the warehouse right after high school. He worked hard and kept to himself. His coworkers knew him as a quiet man who never complained and always showed up on time. They had no idea that inside him lived a musician whose fingers still remembered every key, every chord, every melody. Life had become a gray routine. Wake up, go to work. Come home, sleep, repeat. Marcus lived in a small apartment with thin walls and noisy neighbors. He had no wife, no children, no real friends to speak of. Sometimes at night, he would sit in silence and move his fingers in the air, playing invisible keys to songs only he could hear. But he never touched a real piano again. Then one ordinary Thursday evening, everything changed. Marcus was walking home from the bus stop after another exhausting shift. His feet were tired, and his mind was empty. He passed by the Grand Lakeside Hotel, a fancy place where rich people stayed when they visited the city. He had walked past this building hundreds of times before without ever paying attention to it. But on this particular evening, something made him stop. Through the large glass windows, he could see a beautiful grand piano sitting in the hotel lobby. It was gleaming black, polished to perfection, looking like something from a dream. A crowd of well-dressed people stood around it, and there seemed to be some kind of commotion happening inside. Marcus didn't know why, but his feet carried him through the revolving doors and into the lobby. The warm air hit his face, carrying the scent of expensive perfume and fresh flowers. He felt completely out of place in his worn work jacket and dusty boots. People in suits and elegant dresses glanced at him with curious eyes. But Marcus wasn't looking at them. He was looking at the piano. A man in a hotel uniform was speaking frantically into a phone. Near him stood a woman in a sparkling dress, wringing her hands nervously. Fragments of their conversation drifted to Marcus's ears. "He's not coming. The pianist canceled at the last minute. But the governor is already here. We promised live music for the reception. What are we supposed to do? The event starts in 10 minutes. Marcus stood frozen, watching the scene unfold. The grand piano sat there silently, waiting for someone to bring it to life. His fingers began to tingle. His heart started beating faster. A voice inside him that had been silent for 15 years suddenly spoke up. "Play it," the voice said. "You know you can." No, Marcus thought immediately. Those days are over. I'm nobody. I'm just a warehouse worker with rough hands and tired bones. But the voice persisted. Your mother believed in you. She said you were meant for something greater. Don't let her faith die with her. Before Marcus could stop himself, he was walking toward the hotel manager. The words came out of his mouth before he could think about them. "Excuse me," Marcus said. "I can play." The manager turned to look at him with obvious doubt in his eyes. He scanned Marcus from head to toe, taking in the worn clothes and the tired face. This man clearly did not belong at a fancy hotel event. "I'm sorry, sir, but this is a private function," the manager said dismissively. "We need a professional pianist." "I can play," Marcus repeated, his voice steady despite the fear rising in his chest. "Just give me one chance. If I'm not good enough, I'll leave. You have nothing to lose." The manager looked at the woman in the sparkling dress. She shrugged helplessly. Time was running out. Guests were already filing into the ballroom, expecting entertainment that wasn't there. "Fine," the manager said with a sigh. "Play something simple. Something that won't disturb our guests. Just background music until we figure out what to do." Marcus nodded and walked slowly toward the grand piano. His heart was pounding so loud he could hear it in his ears. It had been 15 years since he had touched a real piano. 15 years of silence. 15 years of hiding who he really was. He sat down on the bench and placed his rough, calloused fingers on the smooth ivory keys. For a moment, he just sat there, feeling the familiar shape of the instrument beneath his hands. Memories flooded back. His mother's face. The church basement. The music that used to flow through him like magic. Then, slowly, Marcus began to play. At first, the notes were hesitant, feeling their way back to life after so many years of sleep. But within seconds, something extraordinary happened. The music took over. It was as if his hands remembered what his mind had tried to forget. The melody poured out of him, rising and falling like waves on the ocean. He had meant to play something simple, something soft and unobtrusive. But his fingers had other plans. They danced across the keys with a power and grace that surprised even Marcus himself. The sounds that filled the lobby were not background music. They were something far more beautiful and profound. People began to stop and turn. Conversations died mid-sentence. The woman in the sparkling dress covered her mouth with her hand. The hotel manager stood with wide eyes, his jaw slowly dropping open. Marcus Johnson, the invisible warehouse worker, was playing like his life depended on it. And in many ways, it did. Because in that moment, something that had been dead inside him for 15 years was finally coming back to life. He didn't know it yet, but this simple request to play a tune was about to change everything he thought he knew about himself and his future. The music filled every corner of the hotel lobby like sunlight flooding a dark room. Marcus's fingers moved across the keys with a life of their own, playing a piece he hadn't touched since he was 16 years old. It was a composition by Chopin, one that his mother had loved more than any other. The Ballade in G minor. a piece that professional pianists practiced for years to master. And here was Marcus, playing it from pure memory after 15 years of silence. The lobby had gone completely still. Staff members stopped in their tracks. Guests coming down from their rooms paused on the staircase. Even the busy sounds from the street outside seemed to fade away, as if the whole world was listening inside the grand ballroom. The reception for the governor had already begun. Important people in expensive clothes were mingling, drinking champagne, and waiting for the promised entertainment. When the first notes from the lobby drifted through the open doors, heads began to turn. One by one, guests walked toward the sound, drawn like moths to a flame. Governor Elizabeth Walsh was a powerful woman who had seen many performances in her lifetime. She had attended concerts at the finest halls in the world. She had been entertained by musicians whose names everyone knew. But something about this music made her set down her champagne glass and walk out of the ballroom. What she saw stopped her in her tracks. A man in a war work jacket sat at the piano, his eyes closed, his body swaying gently with the music. His clothes were dusty. His boots were scuffed and old. He looked completely out of place in the elegant hotel lobby. But the sounds coming from his hands were nothing short of extraordinary. The governor stood and listened until the final note faded into silence. For a moment, nobody moved. Then, slowly, applause began. It started with one person, then another, until the entire lobby erupted in a standing ovation. People who never clapped for anything were wiping tears from their eyes. Marcus opened his eyes, looking almost confused, as if waking from a dream. He saw the crowd of well-dressed strangers surrounding the piano, all of them staring at him with amazement on their faces. He saw the governor standing at the front, her eyes glistening with emotion. He saw the hotel manager, who was now looking at him with an expression of complete disbelief. For a brief moment, Marcus felt the urge to run. This wasn't his world. These weren't his people. He was just a man who loaded boxes for a living. But before he could move, a woman approached the piano. She was perhaps 60 years old, with silver hair and kind eyes behind elegant glasses. Her dress was simple but clearly expensive, and she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had accomplished great things in life. She extended her hand to Marcus. "That was absolutely remarkable," she said, her voice warm and genuine. "I'm Patricia Holloway. I run the Holloway Conservatory of Music. May I ask who taught you to play like that?" Marcus shook her hand, feeling completely overwhelmed. "Nobody taught me, ma'am," he said honestly. "I taught myself. In a church basement when I was a kid." Patricia's eyes widened with surprise. "You're self-taught? That's almost impossible to believe. Your technique, your emotional expression, your interpretation of Chopin, it's all professional level. Better than professional, actually." Others began gathering around, asking questions, wanting to know more about this mysterious stranger who had appeared out of nowhere to play like a master. The hotel manager was now practically begging Marcus to stay and play for the rest of the evening. The governor herself was waiting to speak with him, but Marcus felt the walls closing in. This was too much, too fast. His quiet, invisible life was suddenly becoming very visible, and he didn't know how to handle it. He mumbled something about needing to go and stood up from the piano bench. Patricia gently touched his arm. "Please wait," she said softly. "I understand this must be overwhelming, but what you have, it's a gift, a rare and beautiful gift. The world deserves to hear it." She pressed a business card into his hand. "Come see me at the conservatory. Tomorrow, if you can. I believe you are exactly the kind of person we are looking for." Marcus took the card without saying a word. His hands were trembling. He walked quickly toward the exit, feeling dozens of eyes on his back. As he pushed through the revolving doors and stepped into the cool night air, He could still hear applause echoing behind him. The walk home felt like a dream. His mind was spinning with everything that had just happened. One moment he had been a nobody. Walking past a hotel he had passed 1,000 times before. The next moment he had played for a governor and received a standing ovation from strangers. It didn't seem real when Marcus reached his small apartment. He sat down on his worn couch and stared at the business card in his hand. The Holloway Conservatory of Music. He knew the name. It was one of the most prestigious music schools in the country. Students from around the world competed fiercely just to be accepted, and the woman who ran it had personally invited him to come. He thought about throwing the card away. He thought about pretending that tonight had never happened, going back to his normal life of boxes and trucks and quiet invisibility. That would be the safe choice, the comfortable choice, the choice that didn't risk any disappointment or failure. But then he remembered his mother's voice, soft and tired, speaking to him late at night after long days of work. She had believed in him when nobody else did. She had seen something special in him that he had stopped seeing in himself. For 15 years, he had been hiding from her memory because it hurt too much to remember. But maybe running from the past wasn't the answer. Maybe honoring her meant finally becoming the person she always knew he could be. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He sat in the darkness of his apartment, turning the business card over and over in his hands. When the first light of dawn began to creep through his window, he made a decision. He would go to the conservatory. He would face his fear. He would see what this woman, Patricia Holloway, wanted to say to him. If nothing came of it, at least he would know he had tried. That morning, Marcus called in sick to work for the first time in 10 years. His supervisor sounded shocked on the phone, since Marcus had never missed a single day. But Marcus barely heard the conversation. His mind was already somewhere else. He took the bus across town to the address on the card. The Holloway Conservatory was a beautiful old building made of red brick and tall windows. The sound of music drifted out from every corner. Pianos, violins, voices singing scales, all mixing together in a symphony of learning. Marcus stood outside for a long time, just listening. This was a world he had never been part of. A world of trained musicians and formal education and expensive instruments. He was just a warehouse worker with calloused hands and no credentials. What was he doing here? But before he could turn and walk away, the front doors opened and Patricia Holloway stepped out. She smiled when she saw him. "You came," she said warmly. "I was hoping you would. Please, come inside. I have something I'd like to show you." Marcus followed her through the grand entrance and down a hallway lined with photographs of famous musicians. Some of the faces he recognized from album covers and television programs. All of them had studied at this conservatory. All of them had gone on to become stars. Patricia led him to a small office filled with books and papers. She sat down behind her desk and gestured for Marcus to take a seat across from her. "Tell me your story," she said simply. "I want to know everything. Where you came from, how you learned to play, why you stopped." Marcus was not used to talking about himself. For 15 years, he had kept his past locked away. But something about Patricia's kind eyes made him feel safe. The words began to pour out of him, slowly at first, then faster. He told her about the church basement, about teaching himself to play by listening to the radio, about his mother and her faith in him, about the day she died and how the music died with her. When he finished, Patricia was silent for a long moment. Then she leaned forward and spoke words that would echo in Marcus's mind for the rest of his life. "What you have is exceptionally rare," she said. "Natural talent that cannot be taught. I have trained hundreds of pianists over my career, and I can tell you that most of them will never play with the emotion and soul that you showed last night. They have technique, but they don't have heart. You have both." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "I want to offer you a full scholarship to our advanced program. Room, board, all expenses covered. You would study with our finest teachers and perform in our concert hall. In 2 years, you could be ready to compete on the international stage." Marcus felt dizzy. This couldn't be happening. Things like this didn't happen to people like him. Why? He managed to ask, "Why would you do this for me? You don't even know me." Patricia smiled gently. "Because music is not about where you come from or what papers you have. It's about what lives inside your soul. And last night, when you played, I heard something that I haven't heard in a very long time. Something pure and true. I believe you have a destiny, Mr. Johnson, and I want to help you find it." Marcus sat in silence, the weight of her offer pressing down on him. His old life was calling him back to the warehouse, to the familiar comfort of invisibility. But a new path was opening before him, leading to a future he had never dared to imagine. He thought of his mother one more time. He saw her smile. The first day at the conservatory felt like stepping onto another planet. Marcus carried a small duffel bag containing everything he owned as he walked through the grand entrance hall. Students rushed past him, talking excitedly about composers and concert schedules and practice room reservations. They were young, most of them barely out of high school, with bright eyes and expensive clothes and the confidence of people who had been groomed for success since childhood. Marcus was 32 years old. He wore the nicest clothes he owned, which were still noticeably cheaper than what everyone else had on. He felt like a trespasser in someone else's dream. A young man with perfectly styled hair bumped into him without apologizing, glancing back with barely concealed disdain. A group of girls giggled as Marcus walked past, whispering to each other. He could feel their judgment without hearing their words. He was older, poorer, and completely out of place. The room they gave him was small but clean. Located in a dormitory wing, it was usually reserved for international students. Marcus set his bag on the narrow bed and looked around at the plain white walls. Through the window, he could see the courtyard where students gathered between classes, laughing and chatting as if the world belonged to them. For a moment, doubt crept into his heart. What was he doing here? He was too old for this. He didn't belong with these young prodigies who had been playing since they were toddlers. Maybe Patricia Holloway had made a mistake. Maybe last night had been a fluke. And the truth was that Marcus Johnson was just an ordinary man who had fooled everyone for a few minutes. But then he remembered why he had come. His mother's voice echoed in his memory. He had made a promise, not just to Patricia, but to himself. He would see this through. He would prove that he belonged here, no matter how hard it was. Classes began the next morning. Marcus discovered quickly that being naturally gifted and being formally educated were very different things. His fingers knew how to make music, but his mind didn't know the proper terminology. When professors talked about counterpoint and harmonic progression and Schenkerian analysis, Marcus felt completely lost. Other students took notes with easy familiarity, while he struggled to even understand the questions being asked. His technique was also called into question. Professor Harold Klein, a stern German man who taught advanced piano performance, watched Marcus play during their first session with a frown on his face. "Your playing is emotional, yes," Professor Klein said coldly. "But your hand position is wrong. Your posture is wrong. Everything you have taught yourself must now be unlearned and rebuilt from the ground up." Marcus felt his face burn with embarrassment. Other students in the class watched with barely hidden smirks. He was the scholarship case, the charity project, the man who didn't really belong. For the next several weeks, Professor Klein made Marcus practice basic exercises that beginners usually learned in their first year. Scales and arpeggios, over and over, while correcting every tiny movement of his wrists and fingers. It was humiliating. Marcus had played Chopin for a governor, and now he was being treated like a child who had never touched a piano before. Some students openly mocked him. A young man named Derek Chambers, whose wealthy family had donated a new concert hall to the conservatory, made comments loud enough for Marcus to hear. Comments about how the school was lowering its standards. Comments about how some people should stick to manual labor. Comments designed to hurt, and they did. Marcus thought about quitting every single day. He would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he had made a terrible mistake. The warehouse job was still waiting for him. His old life was still there, gray and predictable, but at least familiar. All he had to do was walk away. But something kept him going. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the memory of his mother. Maybe it was the look Patricia Holloway had given him when she said she believed in his destiny. Whatever the reason, Marcus dragged himself out of bed every morning and faced another day. Slowly, almost without noticing, things began to change. The exercises that had felt pointless started making sense. His hand position improved. His technique became more refined without losing its emotional power. Professor Klein's frown gradually softened into something that might have been grudging respect. The harsh criticisms became helpful corrections that eventually became compliments. "You are learning faster than I expected," Professor Klein admitted one afternoon after a particularly demanding session. "Most students take years to break bad habits. You have done it in weeks. Your determination is impressive." Marcus didn't know what to say. He simply nodded and returned to practice. Meanwhile, word began to spread through the conservatory about the strange older student who played with such unusual passion. Students who had initially dismissed him started lingering near the practice rooms when he played. They would stand in the hallway, listening through the doors, moved by sounds they couldn't quite explain. A young woman named Elena Martinez was the first to approach him directly. She was a violinist from Spain, with dark hair and a warm smile. Unlike the others, she didn't seem to care about status or background. She found Marcus in the cafeteria one evening, eating alone as usual. "May I sit?" she asked, not waiting for an answer before sliding into the seat across from him. "I've been listening to you practice. You play like someone who has something to prove." Marcus looked up, surprised by her directness. "Everyone here has something to prove." "No," Elena said with a shake of her head. "Most of them play like people who have already been given everything. You play like someone who is fighting for their life. It's different. It's real. It's beautiful." For the first time since arriving at the conservatory, Marcus felt like someone truly saw him. Not as a charity case or an outsider, but as a fellow musician. Elena became his first friend within those walls. Through Elena, Marcus began connecting with other students who valued substance over status. A cellist from Japan who had grown up in poverty. A singer from Nigeria who had faced discrimination her entire life. A composer from Brazil who had been told repeatedly that his music was too different. They formed an unlikely group of outsiders who supported each other through the difficulties of conservatory life. Derek Chambers and his wealthy friends continued their subtle campaign of mockery and exclusion. But it bothered Marcus less and less. He had found his tribe. He had found his purpose. The opinions of arrogant young men who had never struggled for anything no longer held power over him. Months passed. Marcus worked harder than he had ever worked in his life. He practiced until his fingers ached, then practiced some more. He studied music theory late into the night, filling notebook after notebook with notes and observations. He listened to recordings of the great pianists, analyzing their techniques and absorbing their wisdom. Patricia Holloway checked on his progress regularly. She would sit in on his lessons, observe his practice sessions, and offer encouragement when he needed it most. She never told him he was perfect. She always pushed him to improve. But she also reminded him why he was there. "Remember that night in the hotel lobby," she would say. "Remember what your music made people feel. That is what makes you special. Never lose that, no matter how much technique you acquire." Marcus held those words close to his heart. As his first year at the conservatory came to an end, Marcus received news that would test everything he had learned. The annual spring competition was approaching, a prestigious event where the best students performed before a panel of international judges. Winners often went on to professional careers. Losers were quietly forgotten. Professor Klein called Marcus into his office and closed the door. "I am entering you into the competition," he said without preamble. "You are ready. Whether you believe it or not, you are ready." Marcus felt a wave of fear wash over him. The competition meant performing in front of hundreds of people. It meant being judged against students who had been training for this moment their entire lives. It meant risking public failure in front of everyone who had ever doubted him. But it also meant a chance to prove that Patricia Holloway's faith in him had not been misplaced. A chance to honor his mother's memory. A chance to show the Derek Chambers of the world that where you come from doesn't determine where you can go. Marcus looked at Professor Klein and saw something he had never seen before in the stern man's eyes. Belief. "I'll do it," Marcus said. "I'll compete." Professor Klein nodded once. "Good. Now go practice. You have 3 weeks to prepare the performance of your life." As Marcus left the office and walked toward the practice rooms, he felt something shifting inside him. Fear was still there, but it was no longer alone. Hope walked beside it now, hand in hand, leading him toward a future he was finally ready to face. The competition would either make him or break him. Either way, Marcus Johnson was about to find out what he was truly made of. The 3 weeks before the competition became a blur of endless practice and sleepless nights. Marcus spent every available hour at the piano, working through his chosen pieces until his fingers moved without conscious thought. He had selected a challenging program that showcased both his technical ability and his emotional depth. The centerpiece was Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, a piece of such power and beauty that it could bring audiences to tears or leave them cold. Depending on how it was played, Elena and his other friends tried to help him relax when they could. They would force him to take breaks, sharing meals together, and talking about anything except music. But even during those moments, Marcus could feel the weight of the approaching performance pressing down on him. Everything he had worked for was leading to this single night. Derek Chambers was also competing. He made sure everyone knew it. His family had connections with some of the judges, and he walked around the conservatory with the confident swagger of someone who expected to win. When he passed Marcus in the hallways, he would flash a smug smile that said more than any words could. "Don't let him get inside your head," Elena warned Marcus one evening. "He wants you to doubt yourself. That's the only way he can beat you." Marcus knew she was right, but the pressure was enormous. He was an outsider competing against students who had been bred for success. He was older, less formally trained, and carried none of the social advantages that others took for granted. The odds were stacked against him in every way imaginable. 2 days before the competition, something unexpected happened. Marcus was practicing alone in one of the smaller rehearsal rooms when the door opened quietly. He stopped playing and turned to see Patricia Holloway standing there with an expression he couldn't quite read. "May I listen for a moment?" she asked softly. Marcus nodded and returned to the piano. He played through the Rachmaninoff from the beginning, losing himself in the sweeping melodies and thundering chords. When he finished, the room fell into silence. Patricia walked slowly toward the piano. She placed a gentle hand on Marcus's shoulder. "When I first heard you play in that hotel lobby," she said, "I saw something that most teachers search for their entire careers and never find. I saw pure, natural genius combined with deep emotional truth. In all my years, I have encountered perhaps 3 students with that rare combination. You are one of them." She paused, and Marcus could see tears forming in her eyes. "But I need to tell you something important before the competition. Something that might help you understand why I believe in you so strongly." Patricia sat down in a chair near the piano and folded her hands in her lap. 30 years ago, I was a young pianist with dreams of international stardom. I had all the advantages: wealthy family, private lessons since childhood, connections in the music world. Everyone expected me to become great. She smiled sadly at the memory. But I never did. Despite all my training, something was missing. I could play the notes perfectly, but I couldn't make people feel anything. The music came from my fingers, not from my soul. I won competitions, yes, but I never moved anyone to tears. I never changed anyone's life with my playing. Marcus listened in silence, not sure where this story was leading. Eventually, I realized that teaching was my true calling, Patricia continued. I could recognize in others what I lacked in myself. I could help nurture gifts that I didn't possess. So I built this conservatory, and I spent 30 years searching for students who had what I never had. She looked directly into Marcus's eyes. "The night I heard you play, I finally found what I had been looking for. You have the gift that I always dreamed of having, the ability to touch hearts and change lives through music. That is why I brought you here, not as an act of charity, but because the world needs to hear what you have to share." Marcus felt something crack open inside his chest. For so long, he had believed he didn't deserve to be here. He had seen himself as an imposter, a pretender who had somehow fooled everyone. But now, hearing Patricia's words, he began to understand something important. His gift was real. His presence here was not a mistake. He belonged at this conservatory as much as anyone, perhaps more than most. The struggles of his past had not weakened his music. They had made it stronger, deeper, more authentic. "Thank you," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I needed to hear that." Patricia stood and smiled. "Now go rest. The competition is in 2 days, and you will need all your strength. But remember this: no matter what happens on that stage, you have already succeeded. You had the courage to try. You had the strength to persevere. Whatever the judges decide, nothing can take that away from you." She left the room quietly, leaving Marcus alone with the piano and his thoughts. The night of the competition arrived faster than seemed possible. The concert hall was packed with students, faculty, families, and industry professionals who had come from around the world to witness the event. Television cameras had been set up to broadcast the performances internationally. The stakes had never been higher. Marcus waited backstage with the other competitors. His hands were steady, but his heart was racing. Elena had come to wish him luck, squeezing his hands and telling him to trust himself. His other friends had sent encouraging messages. Even Professor Klein had offered a rare smile and a firm nod of approval. Derek Chambers performed third. He played brilliantly, his technique flawless, his movements precise and controlled. The audience applauded politely when he finished, and Marcus could see the satisfied smirk on Derek's face as he walked off stage. He clearly believed he had just delivered the winning performance. Marcus was scheduled to perform last. The wait was agonizing. One by one, talented young pianists took the stage and showcased their abilities. Each performance was impressive in its own way. Each competitor brought something unique to their interpretation. Marcus listened from the wings, feeling the weight of expectation growing heavier with every passing minute. Finally, his name was called. Marcus walked onto the stage and faced the enormous grand piano that sat under the bright lights. The audience was a sea of shadowy faces, too many to count, all watching him in silence. His worn leather shoes made soft sounds on the polished wood floor as he approached the piano bench and sat down. For a long moment, he simply sat there, hands in his lap, breathing deeply. He thought about his mother. He thought about the church basement where his journey had begun. He thought about all the years of silence and all the pain he had carried. He thought about Patricia's words about touching hearts and changing lives. Then Marcus placed his fingers on the young keys and began to play. The opening notes of the Rachmaninoff filled the concert hall like a declaration of war. This was not the polished, careful playing of someone trying to impress judges. This was the raw, powerful expression of a soul that had been silent for too long. Marcus played with everything he had, holding nothing back. The music rose and fell like waves in a storm. Tender passages gave way to thundering crescendos. Gentle melodies transformed into passionate declarations. Marcus didn't just play the notes. He lived them. Every struggle, every heartbreak, every moment of doubt and triumph poured out through his fingers and into the instrument. In the audience, people began to react in ways that the competition had never seen before. A woman in the front row started crying silently. A man near the back leaned forward in his seat, completely transfixed. Even the stern-faced judges seemed to soften, their professional detachment giving way to genuine emotion. Patricia Holloway sat in the balcony, watching with tears streaming down her face. This was what she had been searching for all those years. This was the gift she had recognized in that hotel lobby. Seeing it fully unleashed on this grand stage was almost too beautiful to bear. The final notes of the concerto echoed through the hall, hanging in the air like a benediction. Then there was silence. Complete and absolute silence. For a terrible moment, Marcus thought he had failed. The audience wasn't applauding. The judges were sitting motionless. Perhaps he had been too raw, too emotional, too unconventional. Perhaps he had made a fool of himself in front of the entire music world. Then, somewhere in the back of the hall, a single person stood up and began to clap. Another person joined. Then another. Within seconds, the entire audience was on its feet, applauding and cheering with an enthusiasm that shook the walls. People were shouting and crying and embracing each other. The standing ovation lasted for nearly 5 minutes, growing louder instead of fading away. Marcus sat at the piano, overwhelmed and trembling. He had given everything he had. Whatever happened next, he knew that he had played the best performance of his life. As he finally stood and bowed to the roaring crowd, he caught Patricia's eye in the balcony. She was smiling through her tears, clapping harder than anyone else. In that moment, Marcus Johnson understood that his life would never be the same again. The judges would take an hour to deliberate. But for Marcus, the competition was already won. Not because of any trophy or ranking, but because he had finally become the musician his mother always knew he could be. The hour of deliberation stretched on like an eternity. Marcus sat backstage with Elena and his friends, unable to eat or drink anything despite their insistence. His hands still trembled from the intensity of his performance. The adrenaline that had carried him through those 20 minutes of music was slowly draining away, leaving behind a strange emptiness. Other competitors gathered in small clusters, speaking in hushed voices and stealing glances in Marcus's direction. Whatever jealousies or rivalries had existed before, they seemed to have been transformed by what had just happened on stage. Even Derek Chambers kept his distance, his usual smug expression replaced by something that might have been uncertainty. When the judges finally returned to the stage to announce their decision, the concert hall fell into breathless silence. The head judge, an elderly man who had conducted symphony orchestras around the world, approached the microphone with a slight tremor in his step. "In all my years on this panel," he began, his voice carrying the weight of decades of experience, I have rarely witnessed a performance that moved me as profoundly as what we experienced this evening. Tonight, we did not simply hear music. We felt it in our bones. We carried it in our hearts. He paused, looking out at the audience with emotion in his eyes. It is my great privilege to announce that the winner of this year's spring competition, by unanimous decision of the judges, is Marcus Johnson. The explosion of applause was even louder than before. Marcus felt Elena throw her arms around him. His other friends were shouting and celebrating. The audience was on its feet once again. But Marcus himself sat frozen, unable to fully process what had just been said. He had won. The warehouse worker from the south side of Chicago, the self-taught pianist who had hidden his gift for 15 years, had just won one of the most prestigious music competitions in the country. By unanimous decision, when Marcus finally made his way back to the stage to accept his award, the standing ovation continued without any sign of stopping. He shook hands with each judge, received a crystal trophy that felt impossibly heavy in his hands, and turned to face the still cheering crowd. The head judge leaned close and whispered something that Marcus would remember for the rest of his life. "Young man, I have heard thousands of pianists in my career. What you have is something that cannot be taught. Guard it carefully and share it generously. The world needs more music like yours." The celebration continued long into the night. Industry professionals approached Marcus with business cards and invitations. Talent scouts from major record labels expressed interest in signing him. Concert promoters talked about tours and appearances. It was overwhelming and terrifying and wonderful all at once. Patricia Holloway found him during a quiet moment when he had stepped outside for fresh air. She didn't say anything at first. She simply stood beside him, looking up at the stars. "My mother should have been here," Marcus finally said, his voice cracking with emotion. "She always believed this would happen, even when I didn't believe it myself." Patricia placed a gentle hand on his arm. "She is here, Marcus. She has been with you every step of the way. Every note you played tonight carried her love with it. That's what the audience felt. That's what made your performance so extraordinary." Tears rolled down Marcus's face, and he didn't try to hide them. For the first time since his mother's death, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of both his grief and his joy. They were connected, he realized. The pain of losing her and the beauty of his music came from the same deep well inside him. To deny one would be to diminish the other. The weeks following the competition were a whirlwind of opportunities. Marcus signed with a major talent agency. He recorded his first album in a professional studio, surrounded by engineers and producers who treated him with the respect usually reserved for established artists. Music critics wrote glowing reviews before the album was even released. But with success came new challenges. The music industry was not the pure artistic sanctuary that Marcus had imagined. There were business decisions to make, contracts to negotiate, and pressure to produce content that would sell. Record executives wanted him to play popular music that would appeal to mainstream audiences. They suggested that he collaborate with celebrity artists to boost his visibility. Marcus struggled with these expectations. The music that lived in his soul was not designed for commercial success. It was personal, raw, sometimes uncomfortable. He played what he felt, not what focus groups recommended. "You need to be more marketable," one executive told him bluntly. "Nobody makes money playing Rachmaninoff. You need to modernize your sound, reach younger demographics, build a brand that people can connect with." The words felt like a knife in his heart. Was this what success meant? Abandoning the authenticity that had brought him here in the first place? Becoming another product on a shelf, designed to be consumed and forgotten? Marcus refused to compromise. He continued playing the music he loved, regardless of commercial pressures. Some opportunities faded away. Some doors closed, but others opened. Audiences who craved genuine artistry found their way to his concerts. Critics praised his refusal to sell out. A smaller but devoted following began to grow around his work. Elena, who had become one of his closest friends, offered perspective during his moments of doubt. "The music world is full of performers who gave up their souls for fame," she said. "Most of them are miserable. You have something they lost. Don't throw it away for a bigger paycheck." Her words helped Marcus stay true to his path. He performed at smaller venues that valued artistry over profit. He taught master classes at community centers, sharing his gift with young musicians who couldn't afford expensive lessons. He remembered where he had come from and refused to forget the people who were still there. One autumn afternoon, Marcus received a letter that changed everything again. It was from the Vienna Philharmonic, one of the most prestigious orchestras in the world. They were inviting him to perform as a soloist at their New Year's Eve concert, an event broadcast to millions of viewers around the globe. Marcus read the letter 3 times, unable to believe what he was seeing. The Vienna Philharmonic had never invited an American pianist to headline their New Year's Eve performance. They had certainly never invited someone who had been working in a warehouse. Just 2 years earlier, he called Patricia immediately. Her voice shook with emotion as she listened to him read the invitation. "This is it, Marcus," she said. "This is what I saw in you from the very beginning. The world is finally ready to hear what you have to share." The preparations for Vienna were intense. Marcus would be performing the same Rachmaninoff concerto that had won him the competition, but this time with a full orchestra behind him and an audience of millions watching from their homes. The pressure was enormous, but Marcus had learned something important during his journey. He was no longer afraid. Fear had been his constant companion for so many years. Fear of failure, fear of success, fear of being seen, fear of being rejected. But somewhere along the way, those fears had lost their power. Marcus had faced them all and survived. He had played his heart out in front of judges and critics and skeptics, and he had proven that his gift was real as he boarded the plane to Vienna. Marcus carried with him a small photograph of his mother. It was the only picture he had left from his childhood. In it, she was young and smiling, standing in front of the church where Marcus had discovered the piano. She looked happy, as if she knew that something wonderful was waiting for her son. Marcus pressed the photograph against his heart and whispered a quiet promise. "I'm going to make you proud. Mom, I'm going to show the world what you always believed I could be." The plane lifted off the runway, carrying Marcus Johnson toward the greatest performance of his life. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he was ready to face them. He had come too far to turn back now. Vienna was everything Marcus had imagined and more. The city sparkled with holiday lights and old-world elegance. Ancient buildings stood alongside modern cafes, and music seemed to flow from every corner. This was the birthplace of Mozart and Beethoven, a place where classical music was not just entertainment, but part of the very soul of the city. Marcus checked into a modest hotel near the famous Music Waring, the concert hall where he would perform on New Year's Eve. He could have afforded something more luxurious now, but he preferred the simplicity. The fancy trappings of success still felt uncomfortable, like wearing someone else's clothes. Rehearsals with the Vienna Philharmonic began immediately. The orchestra was composed of musicians who had dedicated their entire lives to their craft. Some had been playing for 40 years or more. They welcomed Marcus with professional courtesy, but he could sense their skepticism. An American pianist, self-taught, rising to fame through a viral story rather than decades of formal training. Some of them clearly wondered if he truly belonged on their stage. The conductor, Maestro Heinrich Brenner, was a legend in the classical music world. He had led the Vienna Philharmonic for nearly 2 decades and was known for his exacting standards and sharp tongue. During the first rehearsal, he stopped Marcus multiple times, correcting his tempo and questioning his interpretation. "This is not a street performance," Maestro Brenner said coldly after one interruption. "You are playing with professionals now. Every note must be precise. Every phrase must serve the music, not your emotions." Marcus felt the familiar sting of criticism that he had experienced so often at the conservatory. But he also recognized something beneath the harshness. Maestro Brenner was testing him, pushing him to see if he would break or fight back. The conductor wanted to know if this unknown American had the strength to stand on one of the world's greatest stages. "With all respect, Maestro," Marcus said carefully, "Rachmaninoff wrote this music from his heart, not from a metronome. The emotion is not separate from the music. It is the music. That is what makes it worth playing." The rehearsal hall fell silent. Orchestra members exchanged glances. Nobody spoke to Maestro Brenner that way. His reputation for destroying careers was well known, but instead of anger, something unexpected appeared in the conductor's eyes. A flicker of interest, perhaps even respect. "Play it your way," Maestro Brenner said after a long pause. "But if you fail, the failure will be yours alone." The rehearsals continued with less friction after that encounter. Marcus worked to blend his personal expression with the orchestra's disciplined precision. It was not easy. There were moments of frustration, moments when the music seemed to fight against itself. But slowly, something beautiful began to emerge. The first violinist, a woman named Ingrid, who had been with the orchestra for 30 years, approached Marcus after one particularly good rehearsal. "I must admit, I doubted you when you first arrived," she said honestly. "We have seen many young talents come and go. Most of them are all technique and no heart. You are different. When you play, I feel something I have not felt in a long time. It reminds me why I became a musician." Her words meant more to Marcus than any review or award. He was earning the respect of people who had devoted their lives to music. That respect could not be bought or manufactured. It had to be earned, note by note, phrase by phrase. As New Year's Eve approached, the pressure intensified. Television crews set up cameras throughout the concert hall. Journalists from around the world requested interviews. Marcus's story, the warehouse worker turned piano virtuoso, had captured the public imagination. News networks ran segments about his remarkable journey. Social media buzzed with anticipation, but Marcus tried to stay focused on what truly mattered. On the evening before the performance, he visited a small church near the hotel. It reminded him of the church basement where he had first discovered the piano, simple and quiet, far removed from the glamour of the concert world. He sat in a wooden pew and thought about everything that had led him to this moment. The endless hours of secret practice as a child, his mother's unwavering belief, the years of silence after her death, the random decision to walk into that hotel lobby, Patricia Holloway's life-changing invitation, the competition victory. Every step had been necessary to bring him here. Marcus pulled out the photograph of his mother and held it gently. "I wish you could see this," he whispered into the empty church. "I wish you could be there tomorrow. But I know you'll be watching somehow. You always said I was meant for something greater. I think I finally understand what you meant." New Year's Eve arrived with a sense of anticipation that seemed to fill the entire city. Vienna was alive with celebration, but the real magic would happen inside the Musikverein. The concert hall was sold out, with tickets that had been purchased months in advance. Millions more would watch the broadcast from their homes around the world. Marcus arrived at the venue early, wanting some time alone with the piano before the audience filled the seats. He sat at the magnificent instrument and let his fingers rest on the keys. This piano was over 100 years old, crafted by masters who understood that music was not just sound, but spirit made audible. He played a few soft notes, feeling the resonance echo through the empty hall. This was the moment he had been moving toward his entire life. Every struggle, every triumph, every heartbreak had prepared him for tonight. When the doors opened and the audience began filing in, Marcus retreated backstage to wait. Elena had flown in from America to be there. Patricia Holloway sat in the front row, her eyes already glistening with emotion. Even Professor Klein had made the journey, his stern face softened by something that might have been pride. The concert began with other pieces, performed by the orchestra alone. Marcus listened from the wings as the violins and cellos filled the hall with sounds that had echoed through centuries of musical tradition. He felt the weight of that tradition pressing down on him, but it no longer felt like a burden. It felt like an invitation. When the moment finally came, Maestro Brenner turned and nodded to Marcus. It was time. Marcus walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. The audience rose to their feet, even before he played a single note, honoring his journey and the extraordinary story that had brought him to this place. He bowed deeply, then took his seat at the piano. The hall fell silent. Millions of viewers around the world leaned forward. Maestro Brenner raised his baton, and then Marcus began to play. The opening notes of the Rachmaninoff Concerto filled the music arena with a sound that was both familiar and entirely new. Marcus played with everything he had, every emotion, every memory, every dream. The orchestra rose to meet him, their instruments blending with the piano in perfect harmony. This was different from the competition performance. That had been a young man trying to prove himself. This was an artist at the height of his powers, sharing something sacred with the world. The music soared and crashed like waves on a shore, tender and violent, intimate and vast. In the audience, people wept openly. Hardened critics forgot to take notes. Patricia Holloway clutched her hands together, tears streaming down her face. Even Maestro Brenner, conducting with precise movements, seemed to be transported to another realm. The concerto built toward its famous climax, the melody rising higher and higher until it felt like the music might burst through the ceiling and into the stars. Marcus's fingers danced across the keys with a certainty that came from somewhere deeper than training or practice. He was not playing the music anymore. He was the music. As the final notes echoed through the hall, Marcus felt something release inside his chest. A weight he had carried for his entire life, lifted and set free. He had done what he came to do. He had shared his gift with the world, holding nothing back. The silence that followed lasted only a heartbeat. Then the music verein erupted in the most passionate response the famous hall had witnessed in decades. People were on their feet, cheering and crying and embracing each other. The applause rolled through the room like thunder, refusing to fade. Marcus stood and bowed, his own eyes filled with tears. He looked toward the front row where Patricia was standing, applauding with all her strength. He looked at Elena and Professor Klein, both beaming with joy. He thought about his mother and felt, somehow, that she was there too. When the clock struck midnight and fireworks exploded over Vienna, Marcus Johnson was still on stage, playing encores for an audience that wouldn't let him leave. The new year had begun, and with it, a new chapter in his remarkable life. He had started the year as an unknown man with a hidden gift. He was ending it as one of the most celebrated pianists in the world. And yet, in his heart, Marcus knew that the music had never been about fame or recognition. It had always been about something simpler and more profound. The power of art to heal, to connect, to transform. The courage to share one's true self with the world. The belief that hidden gifts deserved to be brought into the light. As he played the final notes of the evening, Marcus smiled. This was only the beginning. 5 years had passed since that unforgettable New Year's Eve in Vienna. The world had watched Marcus Johnson rise from obscurity to international fame, and his story had inspired millions of people around the globe. But on this particular autumn afternoon, Marcus found himself standing in a place far removed from concert halls and international stages. He was standing in the south side of Chicago, in front of the small church where everything had begun. The building looked different now. Fresh paint covered the old walls, and a new sign hung above the entrance. The Johnson Community Music Center. Marcus had purchased the church 2 years earlier and transformed it into a place where children from the neighborhood could learn music for free. Inside, the sound of young voices and instruments filled the air. Piano scales mixed with violin practice and the tentative notes of beginners finding their way. Marcus walked through the halls, greeting students and teachers, feeling more at home here than he did at any famous venue. A young girl named Maya was struggling with a difficult passage on the piano. She was 12 years old, the same age Marcus had been when he first started teaching himself to play. Her family didn't have much money, and her circumstances were remarkably similar to what his had been decades ago. Marcus sat down beside her on the piano bench. "This part is hard," Maya said, frustration evident in her voice. "My fingers won't do what I want them to do." "Let me show you something," Marcus said gently. He placed his hands on the keys and played the passage slowly, breaking it down into smaller pieces. "Don't think about the whole thing at once. Just focus on this phrase. Get it right, then move to the next." Maya nodded and tried again. The notes came out cleaner this time, though still imperfect. But the improvement was visible, and her face brightened with hope. "You're getting it," Marcus encouraged. "Keep practicing, and one day this will feel as natural as breathing." He watched her continue to work, seeing himself in her determined expression. This was why he had built this center, not for recognition or praise, but to ensure that other children with hidden gifts would have opportunities that he almost missed. The success Marcus had achieved over the past 5 years exceeded anything he could have imagined. He had performed on every major stage in the world, from Carnegie Hall to the Sydney Opera House. He had recorded award-winning albums and received honors from prestigious institutions. His face had appeared on magazine covers, and his story had been optioned for a major film. But fame had taught Marcus something important. The applause faded quickly. The magazine covers were forgotten. The awards gathered dust on shelves. What remained, what truly mattered, were the connections he made with people and the difference his music could make in their lives. That was why Marcus spent half his time teaching instead of performing. He had established music programs in underserved communities across the country. He had created scholarships for talented students who couldn't afford formal training. He had used his platform to advocate for arts education in public schools, speaking before legislators and appearing at fundraising events. Patricia Holloway, now in her late 70s, remained one of his closest advisors. She visited the Chicago Center whenever her health permitted, always amazed at what Marcus had built. "You could be touring the world full-time," she said during one of her visits. "You could be earning millions more than you do now. Most artists in your position would never look back." "I looked back," Marcus replied simply. "I saw where I came from. I saw the kids who are where I used to be. How could I turn away from that?" Patricia smiled, her eyes filled with warmth and admiration. "Your mother would be so proud of you, Marcus. Not just because of what you've achieved, but because of who you've become." Those words stayed with Marcus for a long time. He often thought about what his mother would say if she could see him now. Would she be impressed by the fame and accolades? Perhaps. But he believed she would care more about the children learning piano in the church basement where he had once played alone. That would have made her truly happy. Alina Martinez had remained one of Marcus's dearest friends. She had built her own successful career as a violinist and frequently collaborated with him on special projects. Together, they had founded a non-profit organization that brought music education to refugee communities around the world. Remember when you were afraid to speak to anyone at the conservatory? Elena teased him during a planning meeting for their latest initiative. Now you're giving speeches at the United Nations. I'm still afraid, Marcus admitted with a laugh. I just don't let it stop me anymore. That was perhaps the greatest lesson his journey had taught him. Fear never fully disappeared. Doubt still crept in during quiet moments. But courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was the decision to move forward despite it. On the 5th anniversary of his Vienna performance, Marcus returned to the Musikverein for a special concert. The occasion was partly celebratory and partly philanthropic, with proceeds going to his various charitable programs. The same orchestra that had accompanied him 5 years earlier welcomed him back with open arms. Maestro Brenner, now retired from regular conducting, made a special appearance to lead the evening's performance. His hair had gone completely white, and his movements were slower than before. But his eyes still held the sharp intelligence that had made him one of the greatest conductors of his generation. You have changed, Marcus, the maestro observed during rehearsal. 5 years ago, you played like a man with something to prove. Now you play like a man at peace with himself. I found what I was looking for, Marcus said simply. Most people never do, the maestro replied. That is what makes you exceptional. The anniversary concert was another triumph. Though Marcus had stopped measuring success by applause levels and standing ovations. What meant more to him was the video message he received afterward from Maya, the young student from his Chicago center. She had watched the broadcast from home and wanted to tell him that his playing had inspired her to practice extra hard. One day I'm going to play on a stage like that, she said in the video, her young face determined and hopeful. Just like you did. Marcus saved that video on his phone and watched it whenever he needed a reminder of why his work mattered. As the years continued to pass, Marcus's life found a balance that many successful artists never achieve. He performed enough to maintain his standing in the classical music world, but not so much that it consumed his entire existence. He taught, mentored, advocated, and gave back in countless ways. He built relationships that enriched his life beyond anything material success could provide. He eventually met someone special, a woman named Grace, who worked as a pediatric nurse. She had no connection to the music industry and couldn't care less about his fame. What drew her to Marcus was his kindness, his humility, and his genuine desire to help others. They married in a small ceremony at the church that now bore his name. Surrounded by students and friends who had become family. On quiet evenings, Marcus would sometimes sit at the piano in his home and play just for himself. Not for audiences or recordings or anyone else. Just for the pure joy of making music, the same joy he had discovered as a lonely boy in a church basement. During those moments, he felt his mother's presence more strongly than ever. He could almost hear her voice, soft and tired from long days of work, telling him that she knew he was destined for something special. She had been right all along, not because of the concerts or the awards, but because she had seen what he was only now beginning to fully understand. The greatest gift was never the music itself. It was the ability to share it with others and make their lives a little brighter. Marcus Johnson had asked for nothing but a chance to play a simple tune in a hotel lobby. What he received was a second chance at life, a purpose that gave meaning to his existence, and the opportunity to touch hearts around the world. Looking back on his remarkable journey, from warehouse worker to international pianist to teacher and philanthropist, Marcus realized that every struggle had been necessary. Every moment of doubt had led to a moment of clarity. Every closed door had eventually opened to something better. His mother had believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself. Patricia Holloway had seen potential where others saw only impossibility. Elena and his friends had supported him when success seemed unreachable. And now he had the privilege of doing the same for a new generation of dreamers. The piano that had once been his escape from a difficult world had become his bridge to something far greater. Through music, Marcus had found healing, purpose, connection, and love. He had discovered that talent means nothing without courage, and that success means nothing without generosity. On the wall of his study hung the small photograph of his mother, the one he had carried with him to Vienna and everywhere since. Next to it was a new photograph, taken at the music center, showing Marcus surrounded by his young students, all of them laughing and happy. Two images representing two chapters of the same story. A story about hidden gifts and second chances. A story about the power of believing in something when the world gives you every reason to doubt. A story about one man who was asked to play a simple tune and ended up changing not just his own life, but the lives of countless others.